It's hurtful.
So it's all there. It's all there.
Yeah. No, I was just speaking of the coincidence that there was a 1/3 and 2/3 policy, and how the other ones, the firstborn, were not to receive any of them. We'll get into that deeper.
Hello, everybody. It's Paul Neeson with Torah Life Ministries. We are going to start our Shabbat service. Our friend Jacob's going to come and he's going to do a Torah recap, and then I'll be doing a talk after that in part 2, and then we'll be discussing various things after that. We have a guest in from out of town discussing some things too. So just hang out, everybody. Enjoy. If you could share with everybody else on Facebook and YouTube that we're on now. And here's Jacob with this week's Torah portion, and then after that, I'll come back. So thank you.
All right, Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
So this week's Torah portion is number 38, and it's entitled Torah. And I just want to give a little short little disclaimer. I am a student of the Word, and I'm just a student. I just read it and I pray. I hope I get it right. I hope I interpret correctly, and if I don't, then just go to the scripture and read the scripture yourself. I'm just gonna give a recap as I read it, and again, if there's any details you disagree with, just go back and read it, and pray that the Father gives you the correct understanding of it. Okay, so numbers 16, 17, and 18 is the portion. So we're going to start at number 16. We're just going to work our way through, like always, and then at the end I just have a few notes to tie it into the Gospels. Okay, so Korach, starting in chapters 16, verses 1 through 3. Korach, Moses and Aaron's first cousin. Also Dathan and Abiram and On take 250 princes of Israel, assemble themselves together and approach Moses and Aaron and challenge their authority. In verse 3, they say, "You seek too much power, seeing as how all the congregation is set apart, and every one of them, and Yah is with them. Why then do you elevate yourself above Yah's assembly?" is what they said. Upon their accusation, Moses falls on his face in sorrow. It's in verse 4. Verse 5, Moses tells them that Yah will reveal himself and that he will choose who is to be the leader of the congregation. Verses 6 and 7. Moses tells each of them to bring a bronze censer, put fire and incense in them, and bring them before Yah the next day, so that he will choose then and there who is set apart for the priesthood. Verses 8 through 10, Moses says to Korach, "Is it not enough that you are set apart unto Yah to minister on his behalf for the people? Will you seek the priesthood also?" Verse 11, he continues, "You are challenging Yah's authority. As for Aaron, who is he that you should hold a grudge against him?" Moses then calls the others of the rebellion, those who were not Levites. Verses 13 to 14. They refuse to approach Moses, but tell him that they are not happy with the fact that they are destined to die in the wilderness. They accuse him of appointing himself as a prince over them. They refuse to approach him, saying, "Will you put out the leaders of these men?" Verse 15. As a result of their reply, Moses becomes angry with them and prays to Yah, asking him not to accept their offerings. "I have not taken one donkey from them, nor have I hurt any one of them," he said. Verses 16 and 17. Moses then calls Korach and tells him to come to the tent of meeting in the morning, along with the 250 others, to present their incense, as Aaron presents his. Verses 18 and 19. The next morning, in the presence of Moses and the entire congregation, they did so. When all the incense was offered, the glory of Yah appeared in front of the whole congregation of Israel. Verses 20 and 21, Yah tells Moses and Aaron to separate themselves from the congregation so that he can instantaneously consume them with fire. Verse 22, Moses and Aaron fall on their faces in sorrow and pray, O mighty one of the spirits of all mankind, shall one man sin and you be angry with the whole congregation? Verses 23 through 33, Yah answers their prayer and only kills Korah, Dathan, and Abiram by opening the earth beneath them and swallowing them and their families alive. He does this in the audience of all the Israelites, demonstrating two things. One, that he, Yahweh, has chosen Moses as their leader, verse 28, and that these three men had rejected him, verse 30. Okay, so, and then verse 34, upon witnessing their cries, all the Israelites frantically run away from them, saying, lest the earth swallow us up. Verse 35, Yah then consumes the other 250 men with fire. That brings us to chapter 17, and I'm actually following, I'm using the Hebrew version. If you're using the, I guess, Christian version, we're still we're still in chapter 16. It just starts in 1636, and in the Hebrew version, it starts in 17:1. Yah tells Moses to command Eleazar to take the bronze censers of the 250 men that had rebelled against him and set them apart for the altar. They are to be burned and they are to be melted and beaten down and plate the altar to be a sign. Verse 4 and 5. Eleazar did so, and the bronze plated altar became a permanent sign to all Israel that no one other than a Kohen may offer incense. Verses 6 through 9. The next day, the entire congregation of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, blaming them for the death of Yah's people. Suddenly, Yah's glory appears in a cloud, covering the tent of the meeting. Moses and Aaron approach Yah at the tent. Verses 9 through 11, or in the Christian version, 16:44 through 47. Yah tells Moses and Aaron to separate themselves from the congregation so that he can incinerate them. Moses and Aaron again fall on their faces in sorrow. Moses tells Aaron to quickly take fire from the altar, put it in a censer, put incense in it, and take it to the congregation to make them acceptable to Yah. The reason for the urgency was that a deadly plague had begun among the people. Verses 12 through 14. As soon as Aaron did so and brought the incense, the plague had stopped. However, 14,700 people had already died from the plague. Verse 15. Aaron returns to Moses at the door of the tent of the meeting. Verses 16 through 20. Yah tells Moses to have the Israelites bring 12 rods, one from each tribe, and write the tribe's name on each one. Aaron's name is to be written on an additional rod for the tribe of Levi. Moses is to take the rods and put them in the tent of meeting, in front of the Ark of the Covenant. The rod of the man whom I choose, Yah says, will sprout. Verses 21 and 20 through 22. Moses does as Yah commands him with the 12 rods plus Aaron's rod. Verse 23. The next day Moses goes into the tent meeting to check on the rods. Aaron's rod had not only sprouted, but it had grown branches, flowered, and produced ripe almonds. Verse 24, Moses then takes the rods out and shows them to the people. The 12 princes each take back their rod. Verse 25, Yah tells Moses to take Aaron's rod and put it next to the ark to serve as a reminder to the rebellious children so that they can always look at it and stop any thought of complaining. Verse 26, Moses did as Yah commanded him. Verses 27 and 28, the congregation tell Moses that they are afraid of approaching the tabernacle because everyone doing so is dying. Are we to perish completely, they said? And then this brings us to chapter 18. Yeah, that just finished chapter 17. So now we're on 18. Verses 1 through 14. Yah charges Aaron and his sons to keep the priesthood and carry all the responsibility concerning the sanctuary. The Levites are given to them, to Aaron and his son, to assist in the tabernacle services. That detail is mentioned that the Levites are given to them to assist in verses 2 through 4 and also in verse 6. Okay, so that takes us to verse 15. Verse 15 and 16. All the firstborn sons of Israel that would be dedicated to Yah are told to be redeemed or bought back for 5 shekels, for 5 silver shekels, and from a month old and upward they're to be redeemed. Also, the unclean animals are to be redeemed as well. However, the bull, verse 17 and 18. However, the bulls, the sheep, or bulls or oxen, the sheep and the goats are not to be redeemed, but belong to the priests. We're also told in verse 12 and verse 19, all offerings, which include animals, grains, first fruits, oil, and wine, belong to the priests. Next, we're told in verse 20, the priests, along with the Levites, are to own no portion of land, as Yah is their portion. Verse 21. In other words, they are to receive a full 10th part of what all Israel's land produces. And if we study that out, I believe that would be in the 3rd year. But they are to receive the full tithe. That's their portion. And then in verses 25 through 31 to the end, it says that a 10th part of the tithe, and actually the best part, 10th part, the best part of the tithe that is given to the Levites, is to be set aside and presented as an offering to Yah via the priests. The priests are to take it, the tithe of the tithe. The priests are going to take the tithe of the tithe and put it into a storehouse to feed the Levites and priests throughout the year. This was their livelihood. And then we just had a couple of notes here. Obviously, the overall theme seems to be of the portion seems to be the fear of Yah. And in verse 26 of chapter 16, it says, separate yourself from these men, lest you be consumed with all their sins, right? That comes, again, that's chapter 16, verse 26. It says, lest you be consumed with all their sins. While Yah is a loving, merciful God, he is also a righteous judge who will repay all according to their deeds. A similar warning that's given in this verse 26, is also given in Revelation 18:4, talking about, it says, come out of her, my people. lest you suffer in her sins, lest you receive her plagues. Similar warning to separate yourself from these men, lest you be consumed in all their sins. Okay, so and then in chapter 18, there's sort of another thing. In chapter 18, verses 20 through 24, we see something. We see that the portion of the priests or of the Levites, both, they're not exactly interchangeable. The priests, the Cohens are Levites, but not all Levites are priests. So they overlap, but they're not exactly interchangeable. But anyhow, their portion, it says in verse 21 and 22 of chapter 18, their portion is Yahweh. And it also says that their portion is the tithe. Well, we're told that the people are to give their tithe directly to Yah, right? And yet the people give their tithe to the priests and the Levites. And in verse 22 to 23, it says that, speaking of the Levites, it says that they bear the iniquity of the people. Also in verse 24, it says, the offering that is given to Yah is given to the priest. So not just the tithe that the people tithe to Yah is given to the priest, but the offering given to Yah is given to the priest. That's in verse 24. So what do we learn here? We learn that the priests, or the Levites, were they were actually a mediator between Yah and mankind, right? Because when they were like the middleman, they would give their gifts to Yah, but via the priest. So they would give it. The priest would represent God on earth, right? So they were a mediator between Yah and man. Of course, this points to Yeshua as the ultimate high priest and a mediator between Yah and men. And we can read about that in 1 Timothy 2:5. 1 Timothy 2:5. He's a mediator between God and men. Okay, and then I just wanted to move back to one other note in verse 17, verse 5. And it says that the altar that's plated with the brass that had been the censers of the rebellion, it says it's to serve. It's to be a memorial. And so the biblical examples of people rebelling against Yah, then being put to death by Yah, serves as a reminder not to rebel against Yah, right? And so we can see a New Testament example given in the first 10 verses of Acts chapter 5 with Ananias and Sapphira. They are put to death. And so whether trying to usurp God-ordained authority or trying to hide a portion of Yah's due, testing or tempting Yah is none other than defiant rebellion against Yah. And he deserves to be feared. And for further confirmation, we can also take a look at or recall Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, chapter 10, verse 26 through 31, and it ends that passage that 5 verses says it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. So God deserves to be feared. Amen. And then so that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the Levites, they were able to buy things, right? I mean, with the money that they got, right?
Yeah.
They could travel and.
That was their sustenance and everything.
I mean, they just couldn't own any property.
Yes. That didn't mean they didn't have places to live.
They weren't allowed to.
Cities,
own any
yeah,
property.
that's
City
cities.
slickers.
Right.
They had like the best food.
They're the best food, they had the best places to stay and probably and.
Well, that's the reward for doing the Father's work.
Yeah.
They had the portion.
Everybody say hello to Zach Feinberg on.
Hey, Zach.
Oh.
Zach, hi.
Look out, old Zach is back.
All right, everybody watching. We'll be back with part 2 in a moment. About a couple of minutes. We're going to play a couple of songs. We'll be back with part 2. I'm going to do a teaching. And so come back and join us.
I'd like to ask others' opinion here about